My friend, welcome to my home. I am anxiously expecting you. In this video review, my retro video game room will await you and bring you to me. I trust your journey to my channel has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in this beautiful review. Your friend, L. Hello everyone and welcome back to another retro video game room. This time it's a specially requested video from one of my viewers who has asked me to review Bram Stoker's Dracula for the Sega Master System. Now luckily I'm quite familiar with this title and have many fond memories playing it as a kid, but had never managed to complete it. I just could never get very far, but did remember having fun and that it was very atmospheric and extremely difficult. However, in order to try and do a full review, I need to experience everything that this game has to offer, and I need to try and push my gaming skills to the maximum, as this game, from what I remember, takes no prisoners and can be extremely unforgiving in places. It's going to be challenging, and I'll try and get as far as I can. But this person asked me so nicely that I just couldn't turn down the chance to not only fulfill the request, but also to face one of the most challenging games from my childhood, and to see if I can finally put the death knell into Dracula's heart and live to see the sunrise. So Steph, this review is for you. I hope that you enjoy it. Bram Stoker's Dracula was one of the many movie licensed games released to coincide with the 1992 movie, which was directed by Francis Ford Coppola and starred Hollywood heavyweights such as Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins as Professor Van Helsing. The movie itself is another retelling of the classic Dracula story, which actually follows the novel quite closely, in which Jonathan Harker, played by Keanu Reeves, is a young solicitor sent by his firm to Dracula's castle in the Carpathian Mountains to help close the sale of property brought by Dracula. Dracula has purchased several derelict properties together in Carfax Abbey in Essex with a view to travelling over to England to continue his evil reign of terror. However, after Harker arrives at Dracula's castle, he starts to discover some eerily small details about his host, in that Dracula never seems to eat when he does. All mirrors in Dracula's castle cast no reflection of Dracula whatsoever, and he seemingly has an ulterior motive. In fact, Dracula starts out being very hospitable, but after seeing a picture of Harker's fiancée, Mina Murray, whom bears a striking resemblance to his deceased lover Elizabetha, he slowly starts to prevent Harker from ever leaving the castle by asking him to teach him English custom, and also ensuring that Jonathan writes scripted letters which only indicate he is okay, but does not give Mina or anyone else any information about his dealings with Dracula or the sinister occurrences that he has seen. Slowly but surely Harker starts to lose his mind, more so after having terrifying experiences with Dracula's undead brides, and his grip on reality slowly starts to slip. Realising he is little more than a prisoner and watching Dracula's human slaves fill coffins full of Transylvanian earth which help give the Count his powers, Jonathan makes one last bid to escape to try and return to England as soon as possible. Bram Stoker's Dracula for the Sega Master System changes the plot significantly for the purposes of the game, and that's no bad thing. You play as Jonathan Harker, who has been made the main protagonist and hero, who must travel through Transylvania and England in order to hunt down and kill Dracula, who has taken his bride-to-be Mina Murray, with a view to making her his vampire bride. Along the way he will be facing not only human enemies and undead monsters, but also levels filled with tricky unforgiving traps and hazards designed to eliminate Harker before he even gets to Dracula. Right away I can tell that developers Psygnosis have taken a source of inspiration from Konami's Castlevania series, as the graphics and gameplay are incredibly similar, which I applaud wholeheartedly, and I think it was a good idea to go in that direction to try to create a game that mirrors the style of that successful franchise, but also tries to do something different with it. The adapted plot for the game also allowed Psygnosis to keep the focus purely on Jonathan Harker, and it also means they can be extremely creative and inventive with the many creatures that he faces, and of course the undead vampire Dracula also. Reviews of this game tend to be very good, and on the surface it does seem to be an enjoyable gaming experience. Again, I have many happy memories associated with this game and thought and still feel that it's quite an underrated title. I haven't really played it that regularly despite owning it. I would dig it out every now and again, but again could never get very far. However, I want to do a proper review of this game to see if it still holds up as a must-play title or whether I'm just blinded by complete nostalgia. It's time to try and play Bram Stoker's Dracula in full in order to see if I can finish it. Gameplay. Bram Stoker'S Dracula is an 8-bit 2D platform game that is based off the 1992 movie. You play as Jonathan Harker, who can choose to work his way through 7 levels or scenes as the game calls them in order to finally defeat the undead vampire Dracula who has kidnapped his fiancée Mina Murray. I say choose to because the game has 3 difficulty settings, easy, medium and hard. So if you play the game on easy, you only get to play a few stages. On medium, you must play through about half of the game in order to get the credits. It is only by selecting hard mode, however, can you experience the full game and have the option of trying to beat the 7 scenes in full. Each scene is comprised of 2 levels, the first time being a daytime level and the second taking place at night. Daytime levels are typically easier because the obstacles are relatively only minor. As Jonathan moves through the level, the daytime slowly turns to night, and that's when the undead beings, ghosts and skeletons start to appear. All Jonathan must do is to make it to the level exit, all the while acquiring power-ups, health and treasures before the timer runs down. Jonathan starts the game with 2 energy bars. This indicates that he can only take 4 hits before dying. It is possible to increase his health with up to about 3 bars of energy. There are some heart pickups in the stage, but if Jonathan makes it to the end of the stage with very low health, then you would think that when he starts the next stage the game would replenish it. This is generally the case in many platform games and rewards fair challenge. Bram Stoker's Dracula, however, does not play by the traditional rules and expects you to blast through the game with expert precision. So essentially your health doesn't get replenished after every stage, and so to get it back you need to find these hearts that are littered about each level. Jonathan's main weapon is a sword, which is extremely lethal at slashing every enemy at short range. However, it won't work on Dracula or any of the bosses that you encounter. In order to increase your odds of getting through each stage, Jonathan can also acquire sub-weapons which are fundamental to getting through the game. More on them in the power-up section later on. Hidden on every daytime level is Professor Lorimer Van Helsing, who we found will give Jonathan a weapon to help him in his quest. Once the daytime level has been completed, then Jonathan must play the nighttime level, which is far more dangerous, containing more pits and traps, enemies with erratic attack patterns, and a little bit of lever pushing to help get to the newer parts of the stage. Van Helsing, however, is not on the nighttime stages, so Jonathan must brave these levels alone. Luckily, he can still acquire power-ups and health at various points, but this is not just a case of finishing the level. Once Jonathan arrives at the midway point of a nighttime level, apart from the very first one, he typically must face a sub-boss or bosses that cannot be killed, only avoided. These are often Dracula's brides for the most part, and later on you actually get to fight Renfield. As progress is made later on in the game, they become harder and harder to dodge with some random crazy attacks. If Jonathan can somehow survive these and make it to the end of the night, then he faces Dracula in one of his many forms. Again, these battles get significantly more difficult the further our hero gets. If Jonathan can indeed defeat Dracula, then he moves on to the next scene. This is repeated until Dracula has been killed in the final nighttime stage. Once this happens, then the game ends. The game also ends if Jonathan is killed and has no more lives or continues left, but more on that in the power-up section again later on. So let's talk about the 7 scenes in detail and see what Jonathan will be facing, and also whether the levels themselves are actually any good. Transylvania Daytime. The first stage, Transylvania, puts you in a huge outdoor forest in which several platforms and hills must be navigated in order to help Jonathan descend downwards. This level is designed to kind of ease you into the game and does introduce a small number of hazards to give you a taste as to what you're going to be in for the further you progress through this game. This level features a few spike traps, lifts, and even pits full of water. Unfortunately, Jonathan can't swim and will take damage if he even graces any water. At first things don't seem that bad, but after about 30 seconds on this and every daytime stage, the sun seems to vanish and night sets in. When this occurs, we get a very easy day to night transition, which I think would even make the angry video game nerd proud. This is also where the undead start to stir, and Jonathan has to fight his way through rising skeletons and zombies who are possessed by Dracula's powers and will do whatever it takes to stop him in his tracks. Thankfully, this first level can be beaten quite quickly and doesn't really pose any significant problems. Nighttime. This level places Jonathan high up and requires him to jump rapidly across platforms, all the while collecting the many power-ups that are scattered around. There are a few lifts and annoying birds which might cause some difficulty if you stop moving. The problem is many of the items Jonathan can collect are right near the zombies that rise from the ground, so it's possible to accidentally take damage if you get a bit too hasty. Not only that, but Dracula's gypsies are waiting in the graveyard to keep you on your toes and should be rapidly dispatched so that the route can be cleared to face Dracula's first form, which is his shadow. Now, it's so cool that Psygnosis used this as a boss. There's a scene early in the movie where Dracula and Jonathan are talking after Dracula has discovered Mina's picture. Dracula's shadow then lurches forward ahead of his body and shows it trying to strangle Jonathan. Of course, it being a shadow, it can't inflict any harm, so the developers turned it into a first boss for this game. Genius. The idea is that you must attack Dracula's shadow, which lurches back and forth randomly on the bottom or the top in a small room separated by a climbable platform. This first fight is fairly easy. If you have collected either fire or axes, then you can just throw them right at Dracula. You need to be mindful though of watching where he's going to teleport. The smoke he emits gives you a clue, and this will help you in attacking him. After pummeling him with a few hits, the shadow is killed and it's on to the second scene, Dracula's castle. Scene 2, trapped in Dracula's castle, daytime. How cool is this? You get to experience Dracula's castle surprisingly very early on in the game. However, as expected, it is full of cruel and nasty traps at almost every turn. The level is comprised of green walls with blue backgrounds, lifts moving back and forth over rivers of lava, statue heads that throw projectiles, spikes moving and retracting rapidly in certain narrow areas, and ghosts also make an appearance here. I especially love the skeletons, previous victims of Dracula's evil, just hanging in the background kind of reminds me of Goro's lair. Also, the undead vampire must have had the decorators in, as there are several small curtains sprawled about the level showing the sun and the moon pictured on them. Nice. This level also starts to introduce something which starts to become a common occurrence in the later levels, and that is the fact that certain levels require Jonathan to find and press a lever in order to change the direction of a lift to help him reach the next part of the stage, as it's impossible to make progress unless this is done. A lot of reviewers say that because the levers are in the background, that therefore they struggled with this game because it's not obvious that you must jump on them to lower them, and I do agree with this point. Even though I had no trouble with it, I can kind of see how this would trip up a lot of unassuming players. Either way, if you see a lever in the background, jump on it. If you don't, then you can't finish the level. You will also start to see a few more obstacles to jump across. Again, it's a sign of things to come. Scene 2, trapped in Dracula's castle, nighttime. Now, after finishing the first tricky stage, Jonathan has reached a higher part of the castle, which despite having different decor is loaded with ferocious new enemies. Right from the start, the game introduces enemies with shotguns whose blast must be avoided and they must be killed to ensure further damage is not inflicted. Also, Dracula's gypsies make a return running back and forth, and you would think that the lack of lava would be a good thing here, but no. In this place are pits filled with water, which again can hurt Jonathan, and there are little traps within these pits which throw projectiles in your way, and so they too must be dodged. There's also more skeletons, spiders, ghosts, phantom hands, and of course the dreaded lever. As if all of this wasn't enough, now Jonathan must face the first of Dracula's sub-bosses. It's one of his undead brides, and she has her eyes on you. Thankfully, the strategy is simple this time round. Her pattern is somewhat random, and she will lunge at Jonathan from inside the small room, and it's imperative that you either jump over her or duck depending on where she's going to attack you from. It's pretty easy to figure out, and I'm thankful that you don't have to attack her directly, although I'm sure most people might think that you have to. After the bride's attack has been avoided, you are free to then continue through the rest of the level. It is here that the level's last line of defense gets completely insane, as there are more water pits, projectiles, spikes and lifts. Make it through all of this and it's on to Dracula's second form. Now this next form has to be one of my favourites. This time Dracula has turned young and is dressed in red armour. He drops down from the ceiling like Batman and throws 2 fireballs from either side of his body. These can be easily avoided if you stand at a certain point. He will then start using his powers to force you towards him, and you have to fight against this, as if you touch Dracula at all then you will lose health. Just keep attacking him from the left side with projectiles. Now, one thing I would mention here is that if you run out of weapons then the game sends you more. Sometimes, however, this can be inconvenient because it's right near Dracula. It's best to wait until the weapon spawns again on your side, so don't worry if you missed the first one, as often it's not worth going for it, because again, if you hit Dracula trying to get the weapon, you might lose health and you might not get the weapon at all. This fight is really easy. Just stand at this point here to avoid the fireballs and then start attacking him with whatever projectiles you have. Your sword does not work on him, and thus you need projectiles, and I'll explain more about the weapons in the power up section later on. Attack him till he starts to glow and then run away before you are dragged into him. Once you have beaten young Prince Dracula, it's on to the next scene. Scene 3, Escape from Castle Dracula. Okay, so essentially this stage is simply more of the same, except this time Jonathan Harker is trying to escape from the Count's creepy trap-laden castle. There are more spikes and enemies to avoid if you take the long way, but there's a cheeky shortcut that leads right to the end of the stage. I mean, you may miss out on some power-ups, but it will at least ensure you get to the nighttime level in one piece. If I'm honest, I always use this shortcut as it just makes things a little easier. I do wish there was more to say about the stage, but it doesn't really do anything new, and it's nothing that you haven't seen before. Just work your way through to the end. Escape from Castle Dracula, nighttime. Okay, so Dracula's really not messing about here. On this level right away, Jonathan has to contend with acid pits, a collapsing lift, a spammy ghost who just pops up out of nowhere. There's also jagged spike pits, fireballs, and poor Jonathan has barely even got started and needs to descend to the bottom of the screen. After avoiding some statue heads that throw these horrible yellow projectiles, Jonathan comes across another lever. You know the drill, press it, jump onto the lift to activate it, now immediately jump off. Why, you ask? Well, the lift starts to ascend to the top of the wall, and if you are on it then you could potentially get crushed, and if you do it's instant death. Yes, it's just another cruel way that this game can kill you. This is yet another type of trap that you have to watch out for, as it appears frequently, always with a different result. Once you make it past this skeleton here, then now you must avoid 2 of Dracula's undead brides. Blimey, as if one wasn't enough. What can make this battle super tough is that the room again is tiny. However, the 2 brides lunge at you either together or separately, and like the first sub-boss, the pattern is random. Again, you just need to jump over them and duck if required, and these 2 evil ladies will soon give up. Soon after this there are more breakable blocks and frustrating collapsing lifts over acid pits, with some more skeletons which are intimidating to say the least. This is the sort of game where you can't coast at all, because the game always throws in new variations or challenges to keep you on your toes. The final hurdle requires Jonathan to utilise a few lifts to get across some large spike pits, and this includes going through the wall at this point here. Once you have at least made it to this point, you now have to face Dracula in his wolf form. Now Dracula this time is fast and agile, so you must stand in the middle of the room as he rushes from the right side of the screen to the left and vice versa. Now before attacking him you must first get used to his timing of when he is rushing towards you, so I would say get used to knowing when he is approaching. What you need to do is throw a projectile at him just as he is rushing towards Jonathan, and then make sure you have enough time to quickly jump out of the way. Then Dracula will repeat this pattern from the right. Again, time it so that you can hit him and jump over him when he runs to you. This battle can be a little tough, as Dracula can take a lot of damage in his wolf form. The more skilled players should be able to hit him twice with projectiles before jumping over him, but if you find this battle tricky then it's best to play it safe and just attack him once, jump over him, etc, rinse and repeat. Once he finally decides to give up, it's onto the Hillingham mansion. Scene 4, the Hillingham Estate Mansion daytime. Okay, for the next few stages Jonathan is back in jolly old Blighty, still in pursuit of Dracula. who not only has sailed across to England but has also brought some of his Transylvanian traps and enemies with him, and as such has transformed the once stately Hillingham estate into a high-risk trap-filled nightmare. This first daytime stage is very reminiscent of the castle stages, with spikes, shotgun welding servants of Dracula, annoying hellhounds who shoot projectiles, grotesque eyeballs litter many of the ceilings, and we have more of those annoying lifts. As a final party gift, this level has a large river of lava and a few strategically placed baddies towards the end. Nighttime. So after navigating the lower regions of the mansion, you would think that the estate's next floor would be a little safer. This is not the case. Despite being on relatively safe ground, this nighttime level features Dracula's dogs and gypsies who litter the start, and there are more than a few hidden passages to find, with Jonathan literally having to walk through a wall of spikes to access the next part of the stage. It's not long, however, before you come to another sub-boss. It's here where Psygnosis have been very clever. They could have easily just copied and pasted the same bride boss that you've encountered in previous stages. However, we actually get another differently designed female to dodge here, and her pattern is a little more erratic this time round. She moves in a triangle pattern from top to bottom, right and then left. Again, the aim is just to try and avoid her completely, although I do have to admit this is much harder to do this time round. Still, with a little bit of a push, you can easily bypass her. Next, we have more levers to push and lifts to ride over pits full of water, which again Jonathan can't touch or he gets hurt. Why is the water so dangerous to touch? I mean, isn't Dracula the one who can't touch water? I mean, what does Jonathan do when he needs a wash or a bath? Anyway, after facing the last few enemies on this stage, which caused me to scream bleed murder due to the shotgun guys, we get to fight another form of Dracula. Once again he is young, which kind of makes sense as he's been lying in a coffin full of Transylvanian earth, which apparently now gives him more power. Anyway, this fight is pretty much the same as the second nighttime scene in the castle. The only minor difference is that now Dracula has an extra fireball coming from his head. So basically just repeat the pattern of standing in this spot so the fireball from his left just misses you. It's again tempting to try and grab projectiles that float by him, but trust me, it's much better to let them go and wait for ones that arrive right where you are. If you risk jumping into old Drac, then again you will lose health, and because of this you may not be able to get the weapon, so again when he glows, run away a small distance, turn around, blast him before he forces you towards him. It's easy to think that this fight is harder than it is, but it's essentially the exact same one in principle. Scene 5, the Carfax Abbey, daytime. Now we move on to Dracula's purchased property Carfax Abbey. The daytime stage is tough, most notably because of the large pits full of lava, spikes, ledges and lifts. Dracula's eyes in the sky reappear, as do the spiders, shotgun, men and ghosts. To be honest, it's not as difficult as it first appears. The more eagle-eyed player should even be able to find some invincibility, which helps make this stage a cakewalk. Towards the end are a few deadly spike pits that must be avoided, and a collapsing platform which must be used before it breaks to access the level exit. In retrospect, this stage is nothing compared to the nighttime level, however. Carfax Abbey, nighttime. Now this is where you may start to have trouble with this game, as it features some difficult sections that require a little bit of thought to work out how to traverse. With the timer being extremely strict, more on that later, you can't take your time, and this caused me countless deaths because I just couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do. I mean, I could easily deal with some of the traps, enemies and hazards as they are a given and are much closer together here from the start, but the first real problem comes at this point in the game here. Now we have these huge wooden stake platforms with the tips sharpened purposely, with the hopes that Jonathan will injure himself. Now this wouldn't really be a problem, but they overlook another pool of lava. There are also several lifts dotted around, some of which are red herrings, and this game decides to change the rules whereby now Jonathan must stomp on a certain lift to activate it. Doing this allows you access to the top. However, there are more statue-headed traps up here who have fireballs. So you need to jump on this lift here and ensure that you get the timing right so that you won't get blasted and fall back to the ground below. First time around I didn't know what I was supposed to do and I died time and time again. Once I had slowly found the solution, I thought things would be plain sailing. How wrong I was. After moving through a corridor of nasty spikes and taking a leap of faith to the ground below, you find that there's a checkpoint lantern to press, but it's on the left hand side, being guided by a ghost and more statue heads. Now it's time for another sub-boss, and this time the game is not messing around. Anyone expecting another female bride to dodge will be surprised, as this is not the case. Instead, Jonathan must try and dodge Renfield, whom Dracula has turned into a vampire. Now this is one of the more frustrating hair-pulling experiences I've ever encountered. His patterns are so all over the place and he moves extremely fast. I had a real hard time getting past him and would die time and time again. It took me a while to work out that most of the time I do have to do a huge jump over him to the other side of the room and then duck. However, this would not always work, and despite my attempts I would generally always bash into him, as I couldn't always predict what he was going to do very quickly. The guy does tend to move in a circular pattern, but trying to outmaneuver him was tricky because again he moves so fast I couldn't always see how low or high he was. This meant he kept smacking into me with the random patterns. I would always get some of his harder attacks and would have to keep replaying this section until the game decided to take it easy on me and let me pass with at least a smidgen of health. After that nightmare, things just get a little more stressful, with tons of traps designed to wipe out poor Jonathan. There's yet more spikes, lava and fireballs to avoid, and half the time, because I had struggled with Renfield, I wouldn't be able to carry on due to my health being so low. I would often have to lose a life in order for the game to fill up my life bar to allow me some precious extra hits to make it through. This next bit, however, was one which made me want to throw down my controller. Having just put Jonathan through a test of timing and skill with Renfield, now we are in a huge room with spikes everywhere. Let's just call it the Spike Room. I know, how original, right? The trick is to first break this platform here and ensure you immediately get on this lift, which will take you to the right. Now whatever you do, don't jump to the top, as you will hit the spikes and go plummeting to the bottom of the floor, where you will take damage. As you can see, this is one of the most ridiculous traps ever devised in an 8-bit game. You have to let the lift take you up, then drop to this lift, and then do a mini jump to this platform. It's here that you need to be really precise, and you must try not to hit the ceiling. To make things worse, Psygnosis have got a ton of health just near the end, but guess what? If you jump down onto the blocks that contain the health, you can't go back up the way that you came, and must ride the lift again and repeat your actions to get right back to the top in order to access the passageway. Now after all that, I have to ask, was it really necessary to have Jonathan have to break all these broken platforms? It's time consuming, annoying, and there's barely enough time to get to Dracula's next form. Never mind the fact I just beaten another tough obstacle. The developers are just sadistic. I mean, as everything they put you through, they just want to give you more stress and pain. So I managed to bypass the last wave of enemies and traps and now face an awesome version of Dracula in his giant bat form. This battle might take a few tries to get right, as it does look quite easy. Dracula will pop down from the ceiling a little bit, and you have to hit him with a projectile weapon quickly, because as soon as he goes back up he sends some annoying red bats to fly into you. Now they follow you, so fool them by moving right or left, and when they go towards you, move across to the other side of the room and they should fall to the ground and disappear. Again, Dracula will pop his head out, so hit him quickly and just dodge the bats. Many of you will probably be thinking, well, why not just wipe out some of the bats with your weapon? Well, you can do this, but you need to bear in mind that because Dracula takes so many hits, time really is of the essence, and the timer is very strict. I find it's best to save every shot for Dracula himself. Again, if you run out, more appears from the bottom of the screen, and again you need to be careful not to pick it up if Dracula's bats are attacking you. This is a very tough battle, not just because if this is your first time fighting him you may not have enough health or know what to do, but as I've mentioned, because of the ridiculous number of hoops you are forced to jump through to get to this point is what makes it so hard. After many screams of rage, I finally conquered this almost Herculean boss and was able to move on back to Transylvania. Scene 6, back in Transylvania, daytime. Okay, so now Jonathan is at least back on familiar turf, back in Dracula's homeland of Transylvania. However, it's no picnic and it's full of zombies and time spike traps right from the get-go. There's not really a lot to say about this level, it's just a much harder version of the first stage with familiar backgrounds but just a different layout. Also, to add insult to injury, there's more statue heads to avoid, hellhounds, watery graves and skeletons awaiting your arrival. Unlike the very first stage, you can't charge in and speed through. Also, a lot of the power-up items are booby-trapped and are being fiercely guarded by the many undead beings that constantly litter the stage. Again, the aim is to make your way to the bottom to try and reach the level exit. It's difficult, but not as difficult as its nighttime opposite. Back in Transylvania, night time. You should know by now that this game takes no prisoners and is determined to kill you off as quickly as possible, and I thought I'd seen it all. Now this stage starts off with Jonathan trying to climb up the green hills to the top, all the while dodging or killing zombies. Honestly, it reminds me so much of Michael Jackson's Thriller, watching the zombies emerge from the grave. This is where I really started to struggle because the game is relentless with punishing you and just never lets up here. No sooner had I made my way across the top of the screen and made my way down to this cave, then, you guessed it, I have to fight another of Dracula's undead women, and this time she moves in a fast sweeping triangular motion, so I have no choice but to take damage. Okay, well, to be fair, there is an invincibility item at the start, and if you're quick enough you can get to this bloodthirsty bride before it runs out and save yourself from losing too much precious health. She's still a pain, but even after surviving her it doesn't get any easier. There's more lifts and spikes to navigate, plus more of these green misty enemies. However, they all pale in comparison to the worst enemy on the whole game. It's these birds, and they're right before you have to face Dracula. They fly left and right and drop fireballs on you and are very hard to dodge. Most of the time I would die because they can be very hard to predict, and because I was so panicky as this was the furthest I'd ever gotten. I ended up being blasted off the screen by them. However, after subsequent attempts I was finally able to dole out some justice with some fire projectiles. Okay, now I did make it to Dracula's next form, but I just couldn't beat him. Despite this being the shadow form, which was basically a repeat from the very first time you fight him, I really tried, guys and girls, but I just didn't have enough health to beat him. Plus his pattern is extremely hard to dodge and the timer is extremely strict, so this was as far as I could get on my own. However, I needed to get this review done in order to have a full Dracula experience, so after many hours and failed attempts, I bit the bullet and put in the level select code and skipped over the shadow battle to play the last two stages. Now ordinarily I wouldn't cheat, and I always like to try and play a game fairly, but this game just doesn't play fair. You see, I accepted the fact that this game has tough stages, bosses, enemy placements, and to be honest it's hard, but I do enjoy the challenge of trying to beat a hard game. Now you've heard me briefly mention that the timer is strict, and I hope this explanation kind of justifies why I had to cheat. Essentially, you have to get through each stage sharpish. Now normally in a platform game this is the norm. I would argue that the game's timer runs down a little bit too fast and you don't really get a chance to stand still. However, another reason for me not being able to beat the shadow boss was because of the game's timed requirements, which are A, get through the stage as quickly as you can, and B, if you run out of time you lose a life. Now this is all well and good, but let's say for example you have 2 minutes to complete a level and you lose a life at 1 minute 30. Well, the game starts from whatever checkpoint you made it to and just gives you 1 minute 30 to complete the stage. Okay, so let's say I make it a little further past that first checkpoint and then die without reaching the next one. Let's say it's 60 seconds. The game starts you off at the last checkpoint with only 60 seconds to go. Do you see where I'm going with this? Every time you die, the timer diminishes. The timer only resets when you run out of time in the stage itself. This makes it incredibly difficult to finish off a boss. I can't tell you the number of times I failed to kill Dracula in his bat form because I just never had enough time to beat him, having died cruelly trying to get through this room full of spikes. So if you find yourself with a minute to go and you're pretty far off from a boss, then you may as well just reset. Now I know what you're going to say, Lucas, the game has time power-ups, which increase the amount of time that you have. Now this is true, and in some stages this is really useful, but right towards the end of the game, the developers always place them near nasty traps, and so I end up taking damage. Yes, I get the time needed, but often I have to kill myself because I don't have enough health to help me fight Dracula, or time just runs out for me. So whilst this game does at least attempt to give you some timer icons, often they're just not in plain sight when you need them, and this I feel slightly taints my desire to want to play this game. So basically each time you die, your chances of completing the game are reduced unless you have managed to pick up continues. Okay, so therefore I wasn't able to complete every level in one shot, and when I eventually got to fight Dracula's final form, I only had 2 attempts despite having about 4 lives. If I died, I just wouldn't have enough time to get to him to be able to beat him. Okay, so with that being said, let's now have a look at the final levels of this difficult platform game. Scene 7, Return to Castle Dracula, daytime. Okay, so the final stages take place right back in Dracula's castle, and to be honest, the daytime stage is still very trap and enemy orientated, and my experience so far kicked in and allowed me to at least anticipate what I was in for. We get the familiar spikes which pop out and retract, these annoying red bats, lifts over lava, ghosts, demonic hands, you know, the usual stuff. It's nothing too taxing, and I was at least able to fight my way through to the end. I do applaud Psygnosis for not only making the backgrounds the same, so I had the feeling that I'd been in Dracula's castle before and that this was just another portion that I hadn't visited. Scene 7, Return to Castle Dracula, night time. Now this final level really emphasises my point about the timer. You have to hit the ground running as soon as you start. There are more shotgun welding baddies to beat, breakable floors, and a lever you need to push early on to activate a lift. Now you can clearly see that the game expects me to try and rush through in just 2 minutes. I'm only barely through the first quarter of the stage and I have just over 90 seconds to go. I'm trying my best to hurry up and have made it to 2 more of Dracula's brides with 52 seconds to go. I beat them as quickly as I can and hurry down the secret passageway where the final Dracula fight takes place. Now I barely have any health and I only have 7 seconds to go. So, I'm like the new kid starting at school, I have no clue what I'm doing. Before I know what's happened, Dracula teleports into the room and kills me because I didn't get out of his way. Now that's fair enough, I should have really anticipated that, but I then die at the 3-second mark. But look, the game respawns me at the last checkpoint with, you guessed it, only 3 seconds to go. So I lose a life now because I run out of time. This hardly seems fair. Now I'm not saying this is a game killer and makes the game wholly unplayable, as right before Dracula there is a secret passageway with some timed power-ups to grab. However, they are right on top of spikes that come out and retract the ground, meaning that when I try and grab the clocks I end up losing a bit more health but still collect the time. So unless I have at least one other life to go, or I'm very careful, then I'm probably going to die. So I all in all managed to get at least a couple of attempts against Dracula each time I try to play this level. The final Dracula is his old man form. He teleports around a tiny area, indicating where he will appear, and starts to fire 4 fireballs at once on both sides of his body. If you accidentally are standing in the area he is teleporting in, then you lose health. If you accidentally knock into him during the fight, you lose health. Upon reflection, this fight is not overly difficult, it just takes time to get used to watching his spawn points and avoiding his fireballs. Oh, Drac even got dressed up for the occasion in his Frankie Goes to Hollywood white gloves. He does however take quite a few hits, and again the timer is the enemy. If you die or run out of time, then you have to try again. I had to keep resetting the console and inputting the level cheat just to ensure that I beat him for this review. He finally accepted his destiny after an hour of failed attempts, and I'd at last beaten the game, well, after a fashion. I would say spoiler alert here, but there's really no point. There's no reference to Mina Murray whom you're supposed to rescue. In fact, I don't even think she's in the game. All you get is a single static screen of Dracula on his deathbed with his name misspelled. Then you get the credit screen. The funny thing is, you get this same credit screen if you complete the game on any difficulty setting, and even if you die and are not able to continue. So it's a bit of a letdown really. All this work and all you really have is bragging rights. Again, I would have loved to complete the game all the way through without the level select code, but I will say one thing. I could only ever get up to Carfax Abbey, but I was finally able to get to the end of the back in Transylvania after frequent playthroughs, and I do consider that a hell of an achievement. Maybe one day I'll try and beat this in full, but this was a review request, damn it, and so I had to kind of get the footage quickly I needed for the review. Okay, so now let's talk about the many power-ups that you can get in this game to help you out. Taking a page right out of Super Mario Bros. Are these familiar boxes with a question mark on. So let's start off with some of the strangest pickups which serve no purpose in the whole game apart from the score, and that's the treasures. These only come in two forms, and they are gold coins which give you 1,000 points and Transylvanian diamonds which give you 10,000 points. I mean, I often wonder why the developers even bothered placing them in the game. Again, they do nothing for you, and I found that picking them up means that I have less time to get through a level with. 1-ups. Now these are extremely handy and add an extra life to your total. I would highly recommend playing this game and trying to find every single one that you can, as it's the only way to increase your life total in this game. A very welcome sight. Continues. These are represented by little Jonathan dolls and are often hidden. I was only able to find 2, and I don't believe that the game has that many anyway. Again, you need to gather as many as you can to increase your likelihood of getting as far as you can in this game. Energy booster. Now these come in the form of hearts. The instruction manual says that there are 3 types. There is a tiny heart which will replenish your health by 1 bar. There's a large heart which replenishes it by 3 bars, and finally there's the largest heart which has the power to fully power up your health bar to 6 hits. Now to my knowledge, I only ever found the single tiny heart because I was playing on hard mode. I believe that on easy and medium the hearts are some of the larger ones that you can find. However, the trade-off is that on these modes you can't play through the whole game and finish it. Invincibility. Now this is the coolest item in the game. Find this blue shield and boom, it's on like Donkey Kong. Jonathan can make significant progress without anything hurting him for a short period of time. This again is especially useful if you can pick it up and hurry to a tricky sub-boss, as they won't be able to hurt you until the invincibility wears off, saving you some health. Clock timer. With the timer being super strict in many stages, you can find these clock icons which do add an extra 30 seconds to your score. As handy as this is, I often think that Psygnosis should have the later ones easier to access, as again they are often in places where you can lose a ton of health due to enemies or traps guarding them. I even found occasions where certain levels didn't really need them, but if you're new to the game then they will help you adjust and at least get used to certain levels with a bit of extra time to do so. Weapons. Jonathan won't get anywhere near Dracula armed with just his sword, and so the game requires you to pick up sub-weapons to not only even the odds against tough baddies, but in order to kill Dracula you'll need each and every one, as they are the only things that will harm him. Now they are extremely limited in the stages and don't last very long, with the exception of when you are facing Dracula. If you run out of a certain type of weapon, more will spawn from the bottom of the screen upwards, and you have to try and grab them without being hit by Dracula. All of the weapons are surprisingly useful and come in the form of rocks, axes, torches and double rocks which fire 2 at a time, meaning that you have a greater chance of hitting the enemy. Checkpoints. Now these come in the form of lanterns and are placed right near a sub-boss or Dracula. If Jonathan manages to touch one, then they will allow him to start off from that point should he die, which is pretty handy. Professor Van Helsing. Now Van Helsing is hidden on all the daytime levels in the game, and the manual says that if you find him he gives you a weapon that will help you fight Dracula. Running into him activates him and you get a little tune indicating that you have found him. Now it's the power up blocks that are near him that often have invincibility or sometimes 1-ups and a continue, so it's definitely worth seeking out so that you can get a little bit of extra help for the nighttime sections. Graphics and presentation. What can I say? The graphics are visually appealing, bright, bold, colourful and extremely well detailed. The look of each level has been very well thought out with little backgrounds that could easily rival Castlevania. It's the little details that I always appreciate in an 8-bit video game, and I just love the torches flashing, the day to night transitions, and the skeletons just hanging around in Dracula's castle. Transylvania with its dark forests and muddy hills remains a standout for me, most notably because you can see the mountains in the background and it just fits the aesthetics really well, and having to descend downward deeper into dark caverns and caves added that uncertainty as to where I was going or what I was going to face. I like the fact that when you return to Transylvania or Dracula's castle, it's a different layout each time, but you definitely feel like you've been there before, and this shows a great sense of continuity and identity. Also, despite Carfax Abbey's nighttime stage being a total nightmare, it has this nightmarish look to it, with the platforms all made up of sharp wooden stakes and walls, floors and ceilings covered in purposeful spikes. This being a game based off the movie, Psygnosis really wanted to use the Sega Master System to try and replicate and advance the movie as much as possible. I mean, Dracula's various forms he used in the film, and the developers decided to recreate each one as a boss that Jonathan has to fight. From the creepy shadow to the young Prince Dracula, it's nice to see such versatility in not just how impressive each one looks, but also that they have all varying attack patterns. The giant green bat is my favourite boss in the game, but each one's individual style is well drawn and stands out, complementing the impressive backgrounds at the same time. It would have been very easy for Psygnosis to phone it in and just not make that much effort, but it's clear they wanted to represent the movie and not just create a cheap cash-in game. Jonathan's sprite itself is very small, but somehow it works in a game like this. I think the reason for his size was to make him appear weaker than the creatures and obstacles he must face. His animations and movesets are smooth, quite fast, and are a step above many 8-bit platform games I have played. The enemies that you face have all been individually designed, and no two enemies attack you in the same way. As great as they all look, and it's probably me just nitpicking here, I love the skeletons and ghosts, but just wish they had just a bit more detail on them to make a bit more horrific. I did enjoy the red bats, the zombies and the gypsies who are easy to spot because of their red hair. Each enemy is at least identifiable and their animations are smooth, but one gripe was that I do feel the shotgun guys were a little bit too represented on this game. Don't get me wrong, they are a great and challenging enemy to try to take down, but most of my deaths came because they were sometimes surrounded by other enemies, and I just felt that there were too many shotgun guys, and this kind of ruined some levels for me. The sub-bosses themselves I thought was the stroke of genius. They were all vampiric apparitions that Jonathan has to dodge. At first I kind of thought that the design of the brides was what to expect each time. I did love how they looked with their white hair and yellow gowns floating towards Jonathan at varying speeds and directions. I was however pleasantly surprised to find that many of the brides were different and showed a lot of innovation in their look and animations. Even though I thought that one bride in particular was a little too fast and spammy, I thought she looked really sinister. Also, the inclusion of Renfield was brilliant, as in the movie he is promised to be made into one of the undead, but Dracula kills him off. In the game it appears that Dracula kept his promise, and Renfield is now one of Dracula's armies of sub-bosses whom awaits Jonathan's arrival in Carfax Abbey. If there's one thing that this game needed, it was cutscenes to tell the story. I mean, it's not really a problem, but it doesn't have any. I just felt it would have enhanced the game, giving it more weight. I know that the story was changed, but it would have been nice to have some alternative dialogue and scenes to help drive this story along. Finally, the blood-stained Dracula title screen sets up this game beautifully. Music and sound effects. The music is all originally written instrumentals for the game. Some tracks are repeated, but I'll be totally honest, I never got tired of hearing them during my time playing this game. I loved how some of the music incorporated bleeps and bloops into the themes, which makes them sound more sinister and really complement the graphical style and pace of the game. I particularly enjoyed the nighttime theme when you visit Dracula's castle for the first time. The two themes for the day and night stages do differ from each other, with the night stage's theme being a little bit more evil than the daytime's one. This kind of clues the player in on how difficult the night stages are going to be compared to their comparative daytimes. The sub-bosses also have a theme of their own as they attack poor Jonathan, and it reminded me so much of the movie when he unwittingly falls asleep in one of those scary rooms that Dracula warned him not to. It is here that the undead brides attack him, and this was a great source of inspiration for the game. However, you will know when you get to fight Dracula, as he has the largest, most impressive piece of boss music, and honestly it made me so nervous, not just because I would face newer forms of the vampire, but it added to the tense feeling I had trying to beat him. I honestly felt a little intimidated by him, and despite losing to his second shadow form and having great difficulty killing his final form, the music really helped to add atmosphere, depth and urgency to the game. I definitely have to talk about the brilliantly composed introduction music before you start the game. You get a voice sample, which was a really cool inclusion, and this Hitchcock-esque stabbing music which clues you in, letting you know what you are in for. The sound effects are all fine, with nothing sounding off-putting or annoying. I do love the fact that even Jonathan's jump has a Mario-esque sound. You get little bleeps when you uncover power-ups, and the sounds of slashing your sword is honestly one of my favourite sounds in the game. It's probably very obvious, but the sounds really help you adjust to the game's traps, particularly when you are faced with those bloody annoying collapsing platforms. You get a sound indicating they are going to break. I'm probably splitting hairs here, but it would be nice to have sound when you push the lever, or at least have it in the foreground. I do feel that it would really help players recognise what they need to do and help them get through the game. As I mentioned, it can be very confusing. In-game store controls. These are without a doubt the perfect control style for this game. Buttons and directional movement are fluid, fast and responsive. I mean, just check out how easily you can pull off Jonathan's jump, which is very high by the way. Quite unusual but very welcome in a game like this. Pressing left and right moves our protagonist in that direction. Up will allow him to look up, and you can even keep pressing him to make him rock out to the music. Pushing down makes Jonathan duck and is crucial for avoiding attacks from enemy attacks and projectiles. Pressing button 1 will make Jonathan use either his sword when he is close to an enemy, or a projectile attack if he is far away. Button 2 makes him jump in mid-air. Our hero can also perform a running jump in combination with either left or right. Here's a move I never knew existed until now, and it's one I've never used, but according to the manual, Jonathan can jump and slash if you press both 1 and 2 at the same time. He can also do a downward stomp by pressing button 2, and doing this allows him to break some platforms. I do not have any issues with the controls. Some other reviewers have commented that there is a slight delay when firing a weapon or jumping, but I never really noticed anything myself. Overall, Bram Stoker's Dracula is a surprisingly good platform game for the Sega Master System. Despite not having much in the way of cutscenes, the game still works well and is really fun and challenging to play today. I do feel that the game though is seriously unbalanced later on and throws way too much at the player. This occurs from the Carfax Abbey nighttime stage to the second visit to Dracula's castle. There was really no need to make it so damn difficult here, plus the timer is a big issue and ruins the game, I feel, slightly. I also think that the game expects quite a lot from the player and is saying you have to play it almost perfectly or you just won't get through. You might get lucky here and there, but honestly that's how I felt towards the end of the game. I don't feel that I got through with any skill, and the fact I had to put in a level select code tells you that I got through the end levels accidentally. Also, Renfield and some of the brides were just a little too much and could have been toned down, as the movements become really insane later on and can cost you a ton of lives and continues. My final gripe with the game is the knockback when you get hit. Now, this game, as I mentioned earlier, seemed to borrow a lot from Castlevania, and that includes the knockback. You see, when Jonathan takes a hit or runs into an enemy, he is forced back quite a long way, and this can really disorientate the player, particularly when trying to get Jonathan out of a pit of spikes or from a boss. Honestly, because I didn't know what to do, I would continually take damage. Okay, so Jonathan does have a few seconds where he blinks and can compose himself, but if you're near a pit, then potentially you could easily be forced down, or have your health significantly drained by surrounding enemies and traps. Also, maybe I've been spoilt by a lot of the 8-bit gems I've played in the past, but this game could have used a few more extra lives and continues, and maybe even a password system. However, I don't hate this game because of the issues I've discovered. It's, in my opinion, a very underrated platform game that I don't hear many people talk about. I think the fact that it was a movie licensed game was probably one of the reasons why it got overlooked. The bosses all look incredible, particularly all the forms of Dracula that Jonathan must fight. Each one is at least challenging and never feels old or recycled. Also, I really enjoyed the levels for what they were, and despite some being overly long later on, I thought Psygnosis really put a lot of thought and effort into each and every one. I highly recommend this game, but only if you want a real 8-bit challenge. This game will test your skills to the max and also severely test your patience at the same time, but it's very engrossing. Once I finished it on all difficulties, I never really felt the urge to want to play it again. I suppose the only reason would be to try and finish hard mode without using the level select and try and find some of the level's hidden rooms that I never found before. However, with the timer letting you down, it can be a real grind and really slow things down to a halt motivation wise. It is worth playing today with its responsive controls, music and sound, and remains one of the better movie to license games for the system. So with that, I give Bram Stoker's Dracula a fantastic 4.3 out of 5. So this has been another Lucas Mackintosh Retro Game Room review. So I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to watch one of my videos. If you enjoy my content and would like to see more, then why not hit that subscribe button, because what it means for you is you will be instantly subscribed to my channel and notified every time I upload a new review or video game playthrough, and I've got new videos coming each and every single week. Please don't forget to check me out on Twitter and Tumblr at Dodge This Game. I'm also on Facebook. You can find the link in this video description or on my channel banner artwork. You can email me, and I've got to think about this because I always mess up. It's dodgethisTrinity@gmail.com, and leave me a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of this game, if you played it, and also what you think of the movie. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time for another Lucas Mackintosh Retro Video Game Room review. Take care, and I'll see you soon.